ברוכים הבאים, welcome everybody for those who joined us. We're letting everybody in a minute we will begin. Okay, we'll wait to 1 or 2 minutes for everybody to join in. And in a minute we will begin. I'm very excited that you're with us today. It's going to be a fascinating webinar. We are also live today on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. So for those of you that have friends that are interested and will not be able to join us on time or on live, they can watch us later and everywhere on social media. Okay, I think we can start over. Good evening, everybody. I'm Sarit Zehavi, the CEO and founder of Alma Research and Education Center. Thank you for joining us on our monthly webinar, and this time, the Iranian cyber threat. Alma is an independent, non-profit research center, think tank actually, that focuses on Israel's security challenges on the northern border. You're all invited to enter our website, israel-alma.org, and learn more about us. We provide information for policy and opinion makers from around the globe about Hezbollah, Lebanon, Syria, and of course the Iranian influence in the region. We are coming to you live from Tefen, about 7 miles from the Lebanese border, about 34 miles from the Syrian border. And we are very happy that we are with us today. It inspires me to see so many viewers with us, so many people with us today. So thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions during the webinar, you're invited to write them down in the Q&A button, and we will try to answer all of your questions in the end of the panel. I would like to thank the organizations that co-sponsored this panel: American Jewish Committee, the Jewish Impact, Combat Antisemitism, Jerusalem Press Club, and of course the JCPA, the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Thank you for helping us making this happen. And now to the hot topic of the month, the Iranian cyber threat. And after a few serious attacks last week against national infrastructures and ministries in the US, elected President Biden stated, "A good defense isn't enough. We need to disrupt and deter our adversaries from undertaking significant cyber attacks in the first place. We will do that by imposing substantial costs on those responsible for such malicious attack, including in coordination with our allies and partners." Though elected President Biden related to the recent attacks in the United States that are attributed to Russia, we want to dedicate this event to the cyber attacks by Iran and to discuss these topics because we truly believe that these cyber attacks are threatening not only Israel, but also United States and others around the globe. Last year in Israel, we experienced unprecedented cyber attacks by Iran. Only last week, there was an infiltration to few logistics infrastructures in Israel and cyber attack against Alta, which is a company that is affiliated with the Israel Aerial Industry, the IAI. Second, you know, everything is personal. We here in Alma Center experienced a few cyber attacks from the Iranians. Well, the pattern in these attacks made us understand that the Iranians are using the same pattern to infiltrate into think tanks around the globe, not only here in Israel, not only in Alma, and I will tell a little bit more about that later. At this point, I want to address our panelists this evening, and of course, I want to begin with Brigadier General Yossi Cooper-Wasser, who is the director of the project on regional Middle East developments at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. He was formerly Director General of the Israel Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the head of the Research and Analysis Division of IDF Military Intelligence. And I'm excited because Yossi was also my commander at that time. So Yossi, I would like to begin, with the geopolitical circle, with the wider circle of what's the reasons of Iran to use this cybernetic battlefield, these cyber attacks, what Iran wants to achieve, what they can achieve by cyber attacks that they couldn't achieve with, kinetic regular attacks or terror attacks as they used to do in the past.
Thank you, Sarit. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the introduction. And it's always great to see you flourishing and doing such an important job. It's the idea behind all these activities of the Iranians with cyber, which is not new at all. They've been in the business for a long time, both as defenders and as attackers. Everybody remembers the Stuxnet about 10 years ago, but also their attacks throughout the last decade. The fact is that the reason is that it's very simple. Iran looks at itself as a potential empire that has the mission of spreading its ideology all over the world, but in the first place in the Middle East and within Muslims, and then later to the rest of the world. And it believes that it has the capability to do that because of its human resources. It's a big country. More than 80 million people live there. It's a huge economy with all the resources they have, oil and so on and so forth. And also the history and their ideological position and religious position gives them the capability and the need, everything that is needed in order to become such an hegemon power in the region and beyond it. But unfortunately, to them, unfortunately to us, Iran doesn't believe that it is already well equipped in order to launch the final effort that will enable it to become the hegemon in the Middle East and in the rest of the world thereafter, because it is lacking on resources compared with its enemies. By itself, it has a lot of resources, but compared with its enemies, it is not in a position of advantage. And because of that, it is not fit yet to do this mission. So instead of to overcome the difficulties that come from this position, to compensate for these temporary shortcomings, the Iranians have decided to do all kinds of things. And maybe if you like, I can even prepared a small presentation. So if you give me the capability, oh, not yet. Okay. If you give me make me a host, I will share it. But if not, we'll...
In a minute, you will be able to share screen. In a minute.
Oh, I think now I can do it. So easy. Problem is that I have so many things open.
Yeah, in a minute we will open you the capability to share screen. Okay, it is open. Try again, Yossi.
Trying, but I don't see the so many opened. Wait a minute. No, this is not this. Never mind.
Yeah, it is working.
Yeah, but it's not the one that I wanted.
Ah,
okay. Anyhow, so what do the Iranians do in order to overcome this this problem? First thing, they make sure that they would not end up in confronting in a high intensity conflict with any of the adversaries and opponents they have that is stronger than they are. First and foremost, the United States, they make sure that this is not going to happen. And secondly, that they won't end up in a full-out war with Israel, which is also considered by them as a force to reckon with that can cause them a lot of damage and is more capable than they are. Secondly, they make an ongoing effort to prepare themselves to conduct a low-intensity attrition war. That's the confrontation they prefer, because they have to be they are a turbulent entity. They want to change the situation. They don't want to live with the current situation, which prevents them from becoming the hegemon they want to be. So they have to change the situation. But if you're not going to do it with high-intensity conflict, you have to do it with low-intensity conflict, and to be prepared for attrition war that may arise from this policy. And for that purpose, they develop everything that is needed for that purpose, and we shall look at it in a minute. Third, they have to conduct cognitive warfare. And for cognitive warfare, of course, you have to put emphasis on propaganda and cyber as a tool for influence gaining. And that's another reason why they need cyber. And of course, as it was clear, cyber is also needed for low-intensity conflicts. Third, they want to export the revolution through the use of its proxies, and which they believe will not lead them to high-intensity conflict. And I must say that experience tells us that they are right. It doesn't. They manage to use their proxies extremely well, spread their influence all around the Middle East without running into high-intensity conflict with anybody. And third, the last thing that they're trying to do in the meanwhile is to arm themselves with nuclear weapons and other strategic weapons, because they believe that once they have the strategic weapons, once they have the nuclear weapons, this situation where they have to refrain and be careful not to run into high-intensity conflict may change, and they will be able to deter anybody from entering such a confrontation. And finally, maybe I would mention that they also repress violently any internal and external opposition to the regime, because the regime has to survive. If it doesn't survive, then this entire mission that they have is not going to be fulfilled. So all of that, and for that purpose, also they need cyber, because cyber is extremely well used in order to fight against their opponents, and against the dissidents outside of Iran, and against the opposition to the regime inside of Iran. And as you know, they take a lot of steps in this respect. So this is very clear. As a country that has used cyber and was the target of cyber attacks on the strategic level, Iran, as I said before, understood early on that it has to develop not only defensive, but also offensive cyber capabilities in the context of these strategies that I mentioned. Cyber defense is critical to deny and prevent harm to its strategic nuclear and economic infrastructure. And what they do with the cyber in this context, first of all, they collect information for cyber, for kinetic, for diplomatic, and for other damaging operations that they carry on. And if you look at the last operation with their dissident for ZAM that they brought in, and other operations, even these kind of operations need the cyber capability in order to be performed. Of course, for many other reasons, they need information, they need to collect information. Secondly, they conduct sabotage operations, and they are able to do that even in Israel, as you mentioned in the beginning, Sarit. This is something that they've shown again and again, even lately, maybe even last week. They carry out, as I said, influence and cognitive operations, and they, it's strange, but for a country like Iran, they also are involved in ransom operations. So we have all kinds of cases in which, you know, this is not something strange for Iran. They are hostage takers for ages. If they can do it on, you know, taking real hostages, live hostages, why won't they do it when it comes to cyber? Why is the cyber so good for Iran? First, in order to carry out cyber operations, you need qualitative human resources, and Iran has plenty of that. It's some of them, many of them work for the state. You know, the Iranians have something like 10 cyber organizations that are dealing with cyber operations, either both defensive and offensive. They are based on this capabilities of their human resources. And some of them are doing all kinds of work, not for the government or not on behalf of the government, but not in a way that is something that the government is unhappy with. So they let them operate. And if you look at, for example, the ELTA case that you mentioned now with Pay2Key that performed it, it's not clear whether Pay2Key actually works for the government, but the government doesn't do anything in order to prevent it from working. So it's nice to have all of that. Secondly, cyber is great because cyber is deniable. And you can carry out all kinds of operations that if you did and took responsibility, you would be in a situation where you would have to fear the retaliation. With cyber, you can always stay as an unknown performer. And it's nice because everybody thinks and knows that you did it, but they cannot prove it, so they cannot take action against you in most cases. This is nice for the Iranians because, as I said, they don't necessarily want to run into some sort of escalation.
By the way, a method that is being used by the Israelis as well. All the ambiguous.
It's not unique for the Iranians. It's unique for cyber. It's not even unique for cyber. But,
not even unique for cyber.
But it's definitely characterizing cyber. Thirdly, it's a measurable tool. You can make sure that what you're going to do is going to be in a specific magnitude. And if you want to hit a certain kind of water plant and not all the water plants and so on and so forth, then you can be very precise with using it. And you know, the Iranians are crazy about precisely guided munitions. Cyber can be one of them. That said, it can cause a heavy damage. It can cause a heavy damage, and this is something that at certain points you want, and you can measure what kind of damage you want to achieve, but it still can cause a lot of damage. And this damage can be both tangible, almost like kinetic. You can stop the functioning of some system, or at the same time cognitive. It can cause humiliation to your enemy. It can cause reputational damage. It can cause political damage. All of these things have been done by the Iranians. Usually, if you do it correctly, it doesn't lead to extreme retaliation and escalation. This is something that they were able to do. On top of that, if you are able to prove that you have the capabilities to use cyber, you gain deterrence because people respect you and are fearful. They don't want to be hit by you.
So I want to go back. I want
let me just finish with two more words. I finish.
I want to go back to deterrence later on.
Yeah,
I think it's a very important topic, and I want to talk about it a little bit later. So let's move to.
Let me just two more words. And finally, I think it's a status symbol as a significant power. It's very important for them. They want to be recognized as such. This said, my final word is that they also know that using cyber has some disadvantages, because it invites stronger assailants' retribution. And they know that Israel is, for example, stronger. They definitely know that the United States can cause them much more damage on cyber. And at the end of the day, Iran itself is more vulnerable to cyber attacks than its enemies. And the fact that it wasn't attacked even farther than what it was is because Israel, the United States, others are more cautious in using it. So it's, but they are aware of the dangers of using this tool, and they are following what is happening to them by their opponents just as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that what your last sentence was so important because it actually enabled us to understand the balance of deterrent over here between risks and opportunities. And if I'm trying to wrap up everything you said, I feel that like, okay, now I understand that actually cyber battlefield or cyber attacks has 4 main goals. The first is, as you mentioned, and there are a few words to describe this in English, cognitive campaign, meaning to try to create influence or impact on people's hearts and minds by, I don't know, social media, whatever, boots, whatever we hear about all the time. The second is infiltration and gathering information, taking information out of, I don't know, ministries and like what had just happened by Russia and United States and Treasury Office, whatever.
The Iranians themselves collected information in the United States quite a lot.
In a minute, we'll get there with Erez. Sabotage, you mentioned sabotage, like creating damage, real damage. My greatest fear is that one day I will try to open the computer and, okay, it's not working. What am I going to do? No database. Yeah. And then the fourth one, which is, I think, very interesting, is disruption. And thinking about it, even if they didn't succeed in creating damage, they made us all deal with that, be very busy with that. And at this point, I want to move forward to Erez Kreiner, who is a cyber entrepreneur, senior manager of the company Cyberattacks, and holds the unique record in cyber field. He is the former director of cyber authority at the ISA, Shin Bet, and the director of Israeli security in Europe. So good evening, Erez.
Hi, good evening.
And I want to ask you more specifically, what's the capabilities of Iran in this cyber field, and who are they using this capability against? Can you give us some examples of cyber attacks against countries outside of Israel, and what's the difference? Is there a difference between the way they are attacking Israel and what they are doing outside of Israel?
Okay, talking about Iranian capabilities, let's remember that these guys, they invented chess about 5,000 years ago. So since then, they just got smarter and smarter, and they have good skills, they have good human resources, and they have money to invest in creating capabilities in the cyber arena. The Iranians attack all the time Israeli targets, US targets, and I'll mention a few in a couple of minutes, but they do it all the time. They do it for a couple of purposes, like were mentioned here, and they are getting better and better from time to time. Well, you mentioned sabotage. Just a few years ago, there was an Iranian attack on a dam near New York, the suburban of New York. Well, if they would succeed, then there would be not a really great damage, because that dam was under maintenance process at that time. But let me remind you that when bin Laden was caught in Tora Bora in Afghanistan, they found where he was hiding, they found laptops with what is called the SCADA software, which is the command and control on heavy equipment like generators, like valves, like dams. And they saw some pictures of the Hoover Dam. And when you think about opening the gates of the Hoover Dam, not in the right time, on the right.
1 minute, Erez, you are muted for in a minute. 1 minute. ארז, תעשה המיוט בבקשה. תודה. Thank you, Aaron.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Or have you heard what I said before?
Except for the last two sentences.
All right. So some of the attacks that were carried out by the Iranian were pretty sexy, I would say. I can mention their attack on a casino in Las Vegas, in Sands Casino, when actually they damaged the process of managing the casino. They could, steal some money if they had the intention of, if they could do that. And when talking about the dam, this is a real damage. I mean, if you can control the dam of the gates of dams all over the United States, or even just in part of them, then you can imagine what can happen. A few months ago, I was in the Capitol Hill discussing the nuclear result versus cyber results. I mean, cyber warfare results. And you can imagine, or you can think to yourself, how come? What is the connection between cyber and nuclear? This is something that you cannot make any kind of a balance between them. But let's think of the American grid, of the American electricity grid. If you want to take down the grid, there are about 2,000 electricity manufacturers in the United States. And if you want to take down the grid, you need to use 2 atomic bombs and create what is called the electromagnetic pulse. You need to explode 2 nuclear bombs above the US in a height of about 20 kilometers. That's the result. On the other hand, you can use a cyber attack, and you can take control of not so many substations in the grid. And when you knock them down, then you will have an outage almost all over the United States. You've seen what happened when something like that happened, not out of a cyber attack, but out of other reason. But then all the East Coast was under blackout. And when you examine what the Iranian did to American finance system, when they blocked down almost 50 American institutes, including banks like JP Morgan, including American Express, including Wells Fargo. For many days, people couldn't get service from those banks.
Erez, I must stop you and ask, when was that? Because most Americans are not familiar with any Iranian cyber attack.
It was in 2016, and it was connected to the IRGC, Iranian Revolution Guard Corps, which is part of the, I would say, Iranian administration. And what they did there was actually, I would call it a war on American soil. Now, the last time that a foreign boots was on American ground was in 1812, when the British sent some troops and the American kicked them all the way to Canada. And since then, all the American fights were 5,000 miles from home. Panama, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Iraq, whatever. The cyber brings to war to the American neighborhood. And if you cannot go to the bank, if you cannot do business in Target, if you cannot do something like all the day-to-day activity, this is a war. And I'm not talking about taking down infrastructures like electricity, like water, like sewage. All are in the scope of the cyber warfare. And the Iranian, they prove they have the capabilities. Some of the capabilities are famous because they make a lot of noise, like attacking the Israeli ELTA that you mentioned. I'm not sure what really happened over there, because, you know, if you have a website on the internet, that could be attacked, and if somebody forgot to do something, then something would happen. It's not getting into the core of IAI, but it is a real threat to civil infrastructures, because civil infrastructure, they do not have the skills and the capability to defend themselves against cyber warfare. The regular chief of executive, the CEO, he is not a general. He doesn't have a skill to fight in the cyber arena. And that makes many institutions and many infrastructure under real big damage, because the Iranian, they see the cyber as the kind of weapon that can overcome the gap between their capabilities and the Israeli capabilities, American capabilities, of course, and other super powers. If you want, I can talk about more examples later. I have many of examples of Iranian tech on American soil.
Yeah, I would appreciate if you can give just one more example, because it's truly interesting. What you're actually saying is that these attacks are against private companies, And some people may claim that if it's against private companies, maybe the attackers are private hackers. They are not directed by the Iranian government.
Some of them are private. And if you think, and I don't think like that, that you can operate a huge cyber operation in Iran without having the administration and the police knocking on your door, then I guess it's a pretty far away assumption. So Iranian, the FBI documents that were revealed in a court in the United States just last year exposed that many Iranians or Iranians that are connected to the Iranian administration, they breached into communication companies that deal with satellites. And because in the United States, the administration is based on the capabilities of private companies, then hacking into a company like Lockheed or company like Boeing or other company is like hacking into the heart of the administration. Just to give you two Iranian hackers, they broke into Atlanta City, knocking down almost all the services, the digital services of Atlanta in 2018. There are of Iranians connected to the IRGC, to Navy servers, and from those Navy servers, they tried to reach officials at the State Department and try to make some kind of phishing attack on those officials. And there are, as I said, there are many more. I think we don't have time to mention all those examples, but Iranians are attacking the US privately, governmentally, and all other kind of operating gangs that are connected to the Iranian administration.
This is fascinating, Erez. I must ask you one more question. Are the Iranians targeting the Europeans as well?
Yeah, well, they see the US as the big Satan and Israel as the small Satan. They also deal with the European. If I just can mention, you have like group like Phosphorus, the FBI and American, they call them APT-33, APT-35, APT-39. APT means Advanced Pretended Threat. This is the kind of threat they oppose on American assets. Group Phosphorus, Group Oil Rig. Just to mention one of their capabilities, when they were attacked by Stuxnet back in 2010, it took them only a couple of months until they create a version of Stuxnet, and with that version that was called the Shamoon, they attacked the Saudi Arabia biggest oil company, Aramco, and they knocked down almost 30,000 computers over there in Aramco. I talked with a couple of the guys that went there, to fix the problem over there. They told me what a huge attack and what a huge damage was done to that company Aramco.
Amazing. I want to turn now, since I'm an ex-officer in the army. I want to go now to drill down what we say bashetach, at the zone. And for this, I want to talk a little bit with Ram Levy. Ram Levy is the founder and CEO of Confidence Digital Ltg, a cybersecurity consulting firm that protected us as well, Alma as well, specializing on bridging business, technology and strategic aspects of cybersecurity. Ram was previously the Secretary of Prime Minister of Israel's Cyber Initiative for National Cybersecurity Policy that spearheaded the government resolution on establishing the National Cyber Bureau at the Prime Minister's office. Good evening, Ram. Unmute yourself, please.
Good evening, Sarit.
So, Ram, I want to ask you, what happened to us in Alma? Can you tell our audience in a few words, because I took it very personally, what did they do to us? What they were looking to do to us, and what kind of method did they use?
Well, I can tell you that every cyber attacks, when they happen to other people, they look like a computer issue. But when they happen to you, you realize how vulnerable you are, and people usually take it very, very personal. Your situation was actually a very interesting one, where Iranian threat actors impersonated researchers from Israel. And one specific one was the very well-known general who was the chairman of the INSS. His name is the former head of the Israeli intelligence. And they tried to convince one of the researchers in Alma to comment to a research paper that was yet to be published and hear his own perspective on what's going on in Lebanon and the Lebanese border. It was actually quite sophisticated because they used the Israeli phone numbers and they knew exactly the names of the people from working at the research institute. And they made it look so real that almost everyone could have been fallen as a victim to this type of espionage.
Amazing. And I would like to add that this was not the first time we were attacked this way, sending us reports of other think tanks and asking our advice, except that the time that when they actually, we turned this to you, then we understood that all previous times were cyber attacks as well. This was astonishing.
By the way, Sarit, by the way,
yes.
This is exactly the method they used in an operation called Newscaster. Newscaster was an operation carried out by the Iranians in the United States against a variety of pundits and experts and research centers and politicians. And they approached it, they built for a long time, they built camouflaged center for research that was not actually existing, but was built on the web. And building on its presence on the web, they approached all kinds of experts and asked for information. And it was quite an impressive thing that went on for several years.
Unbelievable. And you know, the feeling, you know, at least my feeling as an ex-intelligence is that the cyber capabilities were not that complicated and technically modern. It was very simple cyber technology, right, Ram?
You're totally right. It's not technologically advanced, but it's cognitively advanced. They understand the mindset of the researchers. They know exactly who to speak to. They have a very well understanding of the academic and research institutes in Israel. That requires intelligence. That means that they have mapped the security think tanks in Israel. They know who's working for them. They know who's senior and who's not senior. They know how to use even they know how to use the language in a way that will not make you suspicious until you read it over and over again that the English is not very good, or that the terminology that they use is not precise. For example, former generals will never say that they're generals. They say that they're generals retired. And even Yossi Kuperwasser, he will never say that he's a brigadier general. Correct me if I'm wrong. He will say he's a brigadier general retired. But in the email that or reserved. But in the email that you got, Amos Yadlin was introduced as General Amos Yadlin. And you can know just by that this is not the way that generals refer to themselves or people refer to them. So it's the nuances that you need to look for, because otherwise it all looks very, very clean, and they actually do a very good job. And the problem is that, and here we go into the cyber threat, is that most research tanks in Israel, they do not do security as good as Alma. And I'm not giving myself compliments. I'm giving you actually compliment that you are aware to it. There is an organizational discipline. You require everyone to work based on security protocols and procedures, that because you understand it's important. But most think tanks in Israel, and in fact, most organizations in Israel don't do half of the things that you do.
So
and that makes them very, very...
What are the 3 tips that you can give to other companies or think tanks, you know, to make themselves a little bit more secure?
Always use 2-factor authentication. That's the basic and most important tip I can give everyone. 2-factor authentication prevents people from hijacking your accounts. Use very good endpoint protection. And make sure that you pay for it. And the third is backup. Backup is a solution for almost everything, especially encryption.
But I think there is another thing that you taught me, which is awareness.
Awareness, yeah. But awareness is a byproduct of the things that we do. Once we become aware of the threat, then there are actions that we can take in order to minimize the risk. And the tips that I gave you are tips that can make people reduce the risk over time. Of course, there are many other things that we do, like continuous monitoring and defense in layers, and I can go into the details. But just by looking at the attacks in Israel over the past year, and one of the things that we do incident response. So in the incident response, we actually take over the management of the crisis in companies in Israel, and some of them are very high-profile incident responses, like Shearbit Insurance. We did the incident response after the second day. There was an Iranian attack against the logistics sector in Israel, so we were involved there as well, and other companies that actually most attacks people are not aware that they happen because they are for criminal purposes, and the criminals do not want the media to know because they're embarrassing the victims, and they are reducing the likelihood that the victims will pay. Victims are willing to pay because they know that the attacks will keep quiet, and usually it will cost them less to pay than to recover the network from scratch. And the only limitation, there is no legal limitation to paying except for one legal limitation. If the body that you are transferring the money to is under the US sanctions list, and then this is the federal felony, and nobody is messing with the Americans. So unless you know for sure that you are paying an entity that is under US sanctions, there is no legal limitation to pay. So ransom is okay to pay. And in Israel, in the cases that we saw over the last, at least in Shearbit's case, it wasn't a ransom. It was something else. It was a requirement for money for the purpose of embarrassing the company, but they did not want to strike a deal. And entities that want to strike a deal, they usually, what they do is they make sure that the negotiation is quiet. They are willing to negotiate. They don't publicize the negotiation and show you screenshots of the negotiation. It doesn't work this way. So that's one thing. But the other thing I wanted to say, and it was something that was actually said by the National Cybersecurity Directorate. All attacks that happened in Israel this year were not very sophisticated in the sense that there were signs that companies could have seen before and could have prevented the attacks. And usually we see three types of vulnerabilities that the attackers are taking advantage of. One, unpatched systems. Patching is very, very important. This is the four. If you ask me for 3 tips, but I'm going to give 4. Patching is very important. Why? Because patching or softwares that are not patched, that are not fixed, and we see their patches every week, are actually a way in for the attackers, usually without even the keys. You can actually penetrate the network and do whatever you want. So patching is critical, and companies usually find it very hard to patch their systems because it's complex. Patching it's a complex thing to do. Second thing is that they will probably do some kind of a phishing to get username and passwords, and that's something that is happening a lot because of COVID-19. Companies that now send employees to work from home have increased the attack surface, and increasing the attack surface means that now the perimeter is not only the company, but it's also the home office that everybody has. And the same computer that is used for work is used for children to play. And luring the user to give you the username and password is not something that is very, very difficult. This is why two-factor authentication is key, because that prevents phishing from happening, and it reduces the risk by 99.9%. That's a research by Microsoft, and I can tell you firsthand, if you use two-factor authentication, the risk from phishing is very, very low. And the other thing is malware. You get infected by malware, and the malware starts, the first thing you do is you sit on the endpoint, and then you start what we call lateral movement into the network. And if you have good security that can detect the malware or can detect the lateral movement or can prevent the attackers from exploiting their access to the network and getting what we call administrative permission, then you can reduce the risk that something is happening. Those are all signs that if you do proper security, you can find them in time and prevent the attackers from doing what they want to do. So on that front, it's good news. You spoke about deterrence, so I would like to say just one more thing about that. As we all know, there are 3 types of deterrence. There's mutual assured destruction. That's nuclear deterrence, which is not really very relevant to cybersecurity. Although, if we think ahead, if I have malicious capabilities in your network, and you have malicious capabilities in my network, then we can create cyber mutual assured destruction. But we're still not there. The other type of deterrence, I think Yossi discussed it, is deterrence by punishment. In order to do punishment, you need to do attribution. The problem is that most attacks are not publicly attributed. The Americans are doing very, very good job by attributing quickly. And when I say quickly, I'm talking about months, sometimes even years, the attacks to the adversaries. So we see a lot of attribution in the form of legal proceedings, which tells us a lot who the attackers are. We see attribution to attackers from North Korea, from China, from Iran, from Russia, but we have not seen a lot of attribution from the EU. Very few attributions have been made over the past couple of years, and we have not seen any attribution from Israel. It doesn't mean that there has not been retaliation. Yeah, according to the foreign press, by the way, the Iranians have tried to attack Israeli water and sewage supplies this year in 2 kibbutzes in Israel. And according to the foreign press, the retaliation was a cyber attack against 4 ports in Iran. One of them is Port Shahid Raja'i, which is responsible for 80% of the Iranian trade. You haven't mentioned that, but we have a company that we established with the Israeli shipping company. So I know a little bit about shipping. If you attack a major port and you disrupt the container management systems, it's a very, very, very big damage. It's a damage that can cost millions, and most people do not know. 90% of global trade is done by sea, not by air. Yeah, a standard container ship can carry 10,000 containers. 1 container is something that a Boeing 747 can take. So it's a question of magnitude. Okay, you need 10,000 jumbo planes can take what 1 vessel can take. So if you disrupt the operational abilities of 4 ports, that's a damage of millions. So I'm not surprised that Iran is retaliating now against the logistics sectors in Israel, if this is indeed Iran. So this is the second type of deterrence, and I hope to see more public attribution and more public retaliation. I think it's very important for deterrence. But the third type, which I think is the most important type, is deterrence by denial, okay? Deterrence by denial is that I do security so well that instead of attacking me, they will attack another entity. And if you think about it, most attacks are for the purpose of either creating some kind of an embarrassment, and as you said before, the technological capabilities are good, but they're not extremely good. We haven't seen any 0 days used in any of the attacks in Israel. And the other types of attack are 95% of the attacks are attacks for criminal purposes. And, attacking costs money as well. So if you build walls that are high enough and you make the attacks hard enough, then you create a situation where adversaries need to invest more money in the attacks, and therefore they are deterred because it's too hard to execute. And this is a place where we as a nation need to get better. We are very good when it comes to banks and institutional companies because they're highly regulated, and of course critical infrastructure, which Ariel Skyder knows. Israel has been in the business of protecting critical infrastructure since 2002. So we are good in that respect, but we are not good when it comes to things that are not critical and are not regulated. And as you see, most companies that are attacked in Israel today are not regulated. So naturally, they have less good defense, and they're an easier target by adversaries. So we need to invest in better security in order to increase the deterrence by denial.
Ram, this was fascinating and enlightening. Thank you so much. And we have very short time. Erez, I would like to ask you a 1-minute question. What could be done more? And since Ram already talked about Israel, I would to ask you what could be done more by authorities outside of Israel that they are not doing enough, or maybe not doing enough, to protect themselves from cyber attacks?
Well, I guess the best way would be speeches by the President in the United States, speeches by the prime ministers in other Western countries, because in order to convince people that they have to invest money in cyber defense, you need to have someone with authority. The Israeli defense is being regulated and is being promoted by the prime minister since 2002, like it was 20 years ago. And I can tell you, I had times when I had to fight, really fight. I mean, it was a cyber versus cyber, our Israelis against the Iranian on a real time, computer versus computer, taking or pushing them back from their targets in Israel. So there's a lot that can be done on a national level. It's much more complicated in the States than it is in Israel. This is maybe the only advantage that we have to be a small, being a small country. I had a meeting once at the FBI, and I asked my colleague, why don't you send all the security officers the memo which tell them what to do or regulate them? And he looked at me smiling and he told me, well, there are about 17,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. And here in Israel, I had all the security officers in my cell phone and I could contact them immediately. So it gives us, in Israel, it gives us like a very wide view of all the cyber arena. Because if you are in the state and you deal with transportation, you do not deal with electricity. And if you deal with water, you do not deal with nuclear. In Israel, we deal with all those things, and we have a very short communication lines, and we create those communication lines, and we create the partnership with the related industries, so we could promote the level of cyber defense to heights that, you know, I'm not trying to underestimate my opponents, vice versa. I always tell my people that they have to think that the opponent is much smarter than we are, but still we need to defend our assets from any cyber attack. So the best thing is to raise the awareness against the politician, to hear them talking about that to the public, and to hear them talking about it in a smart way, because sometimes I see politicians talking about cyber, and it really, you know, makes people that understand, it makes them laugh. So I understand that not everybody is a cyber expert, but if you take it into, if you make like a parallelism between cyber and kinetic weapons, everybody in the administration know what a tank is, what a fighter, a jet fighter is, and what a rifle is. And he can describe how the, at least, you know, in general view, you can describe the fight. I'm not sure that even 1% of the people in the administration can describe how does a cyber fight look like, or what is a real cyber warfare. So this is the first thing, and then there will be many other things, just like Ram mentioned. You know, my people, when I visit companies, I do consulting for big enterprises and companies, and I see the situation over there. Sometimes, you know, I just, you know, touch my head. You don't believe what you see. You understand that like that, you can knock down a whole enterprise, I don't know, in a minute of 2 hours.
Erez, there are a few questions here that I can actually address to you First, how Iran reached to these capabilities without anyone preventing it from happening, from reaching these capabilities. Nobody stopped them. And second question is, the UN is doing anything about that, about cyber battlefield, or do you see anything happen there?
Have you seen the smile on Ram's face? That's
they
about
issue good documents.
That's about the UN.
They have very good documents, yeah.
Yeah, there are some documents, Stalin documents, some initiatives, but since cyber has its own characteristics, when you don't see heat that comes out from engines, you don't see movement of troops, and many sensors cannot detect what is being done. And then you cannot really create a deter in the cyber arena, and you cannot make people don't don't program or don't write program, because this is about knowledge. As you cannot avoid the Iranian know how to multiply or how to do some mathematics, then you cannot avoid them from having the knowledge to create the good cyber weapons, and they do it all the time.
Kufarwasser, I want to turn to you for some closing remarks, and actually I have two connected questions. One was asked here about Fakhrizadeh, whether the attacks in the near future would be attacks as a revenge of the killing of Fakhrizadeh, and I would add another layer. How would 2021 is going to look like when we speak about the cybernetic battlefield?
So I think that obviously cyber attacks were amongst the options that the Iranians were considering as retaliation for Fakhrizadeh and also at Soleimani at the time. And it's always, and they also used it, by the way, in the case of the water plant, it was allegedly in retaliation for some Israeli attack in Syria. So it's they are aware of the fact that they can use that. Just as I described it in the beginning, this was built in order to serve as a tool that can be used in order to avoid the further escalation and be able to measure your response. And in this respect, if you look at 2021, I think that definitely we shall see far more Iranian activity on cyber because they are heading into a situation where they are suffering. They have to convince the Americans that they should go back into the JCPOA. One way to show the Americans that there is a price to pay for not doing that is by using cyber. So I believe that we shall see some attempts to do that. And the way to make sure that they understand that they have a heavy price to pay and deter them from doing that is, as I say, we cannot make them not know mathematics. So what we have to convince them is that the price they're going to pay for doing that is going to be really high. Not only by improving our defenses, which is always true, and Rami was referring to that very well, but also by showing them that we might go into something that we didn't do until now. Not we, Israel, but we, the opponents of Iran, mainly the United States. And the one thing that that was never done was to help the people of Iran have access to information that is prevented from them, deprived from them, and help them to communicate between themselves in a way that is not governed by the Iranian police, cyber police. They have a cyber police. So it's that's what we have to do, what the Americans have to do if they want to be able to prevent the Iranians from using cyber against them.
What do you mean by cyber police?
They have in Iran cyber police that makes sure that people don't look at Google and the things that they are not supposed to when they are not supposed to, and don't go and see dissidents sites and so on and so forth, and don't not exposed to Western propaganda. These are all things that the cyber police has to make sure.
Interesting. Ram, there is a question here. In the cyber world, is there such a thing as an active armor analog that upon detection will not only prevent damage, but will direct damaging software to the attacker or back to the attacker?
The question of hacking back has we're talking about hacking back. I know who's attacking me, so I'm hacking back in order to prevent an attack. It has a legal implication because one of the issues is that sometimes, actually in most attacks, adversaries will use other people's infrastructure in order to attack. For example, I can use your computer in order to attack Yossi Cooper-Vass's computer. So if Yossi will attack back, so Yossi would, in hacking back, Yossi might attack you, and you might be a victim of something you didn't even know that you are a part of. So it has a lot of legal implications. We're actually discussing it a lot. Right now, the only entities that are allowed to attack back, even for self-defense, are government entities, and I'm pretty sure that they do it. And this is one of their roles. Companies are not allowed to hack back, and therefore active armor is not really a viable option for civilian entities. We have to keep in mind one more thing. Unlike the conventional battlefield, where it's usually military against military, now it's changing a little bit because militaries or terrorist organizations are attacking the home front. In cyber, it is the home front that is under attack. It is the front line. It is the companies, the banks, the insurance companies that are the front line. And the military is actually in the back line because they're not usually, the attacks are not usually directed towards them. Therefore, we need to change our state of mind when we speak about active defense and what layer of protection the government is giving to civilian companies that are being attacked as part of the war between the wars or intensity between nations. That's a very big issue because I can tell you that when in incident responses that we do for Israeli companies, usually what the government is doing, they're asking for reports. We're just filing reports and telling what's happening, and they're just, excuse my language, they're sucking up our resources to tell them what's going on a daily basis. And except for some consultation that we get or professional advice that we get from the National Cybersecurity Directorate, which doesn't really have any formal powers because they are established by a government resolution, not by law, other regulators are actually doing nothing except for asking for paperwork. And they're not really providing the help that companies need when they are in crisis. And as you know, Sarit, you've experienced that yourself. You didn't have anyone to call to except for companies that are providing you solutions. You couldn't call the police. You couldn't call the military.
I tried, but they didn't do anything with that.
Exactly. And think about it. In the real world, if someone would break into your house and steal your laptop, you would call the police. If someone would steal your car, you would call the police. If someone will take your kid and will ask for ransom, the government will tell you not to pay and they will bring back your kid. It doesn't happen in cyberspace. In cyberspace, companies are actually left alone. And this is a very, very big moral issue, not necessarily a defense issue, because they're actually in reality, they're left alone and then as victims, they're being criticized for not doing their job well enough, where it's actually the job of the government to prevent nation-state attacks against the companies that are in the home front of the nation. We are entering a moral issue, which is very big.
Amazing. And I really want to wrap up with just your last sentence, because I feel that, and you know, it is something that I'm experienced with, and I'm sure that Yossi is experienced with, the issue of home front. The issue of the home front is under attack. And now I understand that the home front is under attack in this current or future battlefield, not only kinetically with missiles that are being launched from civilian areas to civilian areas, but also with cyber attacks that are being launched from semi-civilian entities to civilian entities and companies that are giving services to national companies. This is very interesting, and I'm sure that everybody, Israel, United States, in the West, Saudi Arabia, which was mentioned here as well, will have to develop tools of deterrence, of defense, of attack, in order to handle this war in a very comprehensive way, like any other war that we are already experienced with. And as all of you said, this is also not part of all-out war. It's also part of the Mabam, the campaign between the wars that is happening in various places around the globe from, by the way, both sides.
And I would add law enforcement. Without law enforcement, and the ability to punish those who execute the attacks and not punish the victims of the attack, nothing will change. In fact, it will only get worse.
So thank you very much, Yossi Cooper-Wasser, General Yossi Cooper-Wasser, Erez Klein, Ram Levy. I'm truly honored that you took the time to be with us today. I think it was fascinating. We had tens of people following us on social media and here on Zoom. And before we wrap, if you love our work in Alma, you're invited to contribute and support us however you like. You know, every dollar counts. It was a rough year, but I think we managed to develop a new challenge to reach out and to bring more exclusive information. I'm saying a few words of summary to 2020 as well. So truly, thank you for all of those who are following us and supporting us. Please continue to do so. If you're enjoying this session, you can book a private session as well for your own group. We have various of educational programs concerning Israel security challenges here in the north. And of course, you can see all these programs on our website. All the programs of face-to-face are now available online. I'm Sarit Zehavi, live from the Galilee, northern Israel. Shalom, and I hope to see you next time on our monthly webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.